There are more than 200 sales assessment tools on the market based on search. Despite that, many companies hire sales reps without using a tool. Now, in the industrial space, where we're talking about big ticket, complex deals, each failed hire costs somewhere between $500,000 to $1,000,000, considering both the direct and the opportunity costs. So I'd argue that not using a data-driven tool is actually nuts. But even among the minority of companies that do use assessment tools for hiring decisions, I'd argue that most have no idea whether they actually work. And I mean work in a very specific technical sense, not work as in does the sales rep show up and produce friction and activity, but work as in predict whether somebody will grow revenue profitably and hit quoting. That's a very different question. And the answer for most of the tools that companies are buying and using is that there's no credible evidence they do. I recently spent time tracking down the technical documentation for 14 of the most commonly referenced sales assessment tools, not the marketing pages, the actual technical manuals, or the closest thing I could find, the documents that tell you how the tool was built, what it was validated against, and what the evidence shows about whether scores on the instrument correlate with actual sales performance. In many cases, I found digests and opinion letters rather than the manuals themselves, which are often deeply hidden and only personally released. Now, you can decide why that might be. But here's what I found, and why it matters for anyone making hiring decisions on a sales team. The standard in industrial and organizational psychology for hiring assessments is something called predictive validity, specifically a validity coefficient that shows the correlation between assessment scores and subsequent job performance. A coefficient of 0.30 or higher is considered practically useful for hiring decisions. Most personality tests achieve 0.10 to 0.20 for general job performance. Cognitive ability tests get to 0.40 or 0.55, and that's your baseline. That's what you're measuring against when someone tells you their tool is X% accurate. Further, there's a big difference between accuracy and whether someone will fit well with others on a team, kind of in that context, versus whether as an enterprise sales rep, they'll actually enter new accounts, grow margins, and grow revenue. That distinction is something I'm going to weave throughout this conversation. Now, let me walk through what my research and search and the AI-assisted distillation of the evidence actually shows, from strongest to weakest. This is opinion based on what I've found. The Big Five personality model, specifically the NEO-PI-R developed by Costa and McRae, has the strongest independent scientific foundation of anything on this list for determining personality type and fit. The tool wasn't built for sales hiring. It's a general personality instrument. There's a foundational 1991 meta-analysis by Barrick and Mount in personnel psychology. I'll admit, the world has changed a lot since 91. That examined over 100 studies across occupational groups. For sales roles specifically, conscientiousness and extroversion were the most valid predictors of sales success within their framework. Now, this is peer-reviewed, independently conducted research. And again, this is looking at a personality, which according to research by Andy Miller, is generally only about 22% predictive of sales success. OMG, or Objective Management Group, is the strongest purpose-built sales assessment I found documentation for. Their technical manual is publicly available, which immediately puts them ahead of most competitors. It documents 21 sales-specific competencies across 30-plus years of data and over 750,000 evaluations. The competency model is built around actual sales behaviors, not personality traits in general, but the specific abilities that differentiate high and low performers in complex B2B sales. The documentation on the weaknesses as performance predictors is particularly relevant for industrial portcos, where salespeople need to hunt new logos and operate at the executive level. The limitation is that the peer-reviewed independent research isn't as deep as the Big Five, but for practitioner use in B2B complex sales, it's the most documented, purpose-built tool I found. I'm Ed Marsh, and I do use OMG tools routinely in my work with middle market industrial sponsors and portcos when I'm focused on helping them grow organic revenue. I'll drop a link below this video for more info. SPQ Gold, the sales preference questionnaire, is narrower, but it's well validated in its lane. It measures call reluctance, which is the tendency to avoid sales prospecting activities due to emotional hesitation. The validation work ties scores to actual dollar outcomes, and the construct validity research is solid. If your specific problem is pipeline creation, reps who aren't prospecting and managers who can't figure out why, this tool may address it directly with real documentation. It's not a comprehensive sales assessment. It's not looking at a variety of other factors, but it is doing what it claims to do, and that's more than you can say for most of the alternatives. Of course, once your reps have prospected, their ability to reach decision makers, to sell consultatively, to establish value, to navigate large matrix buying teams, to close, etc., are also important. Caliper sits in the middle group. They have a technical manual. Now, you have to request it from Talogy, and there are 11 validated sales job models in their system. The research from Kangas and Lego and Greenberg's earlier work, published in Harvard Business Review, provides some support for the instrument for sales selection. The evidence is moderate, not definitive. It's probably the strongest personality-based option for sales hiring among the tools designed for that purpose. But again, with the caveat for Miller's research published in his book, The Science of Hiring Quota-Busting Sales Teams, that behavioral and personality tests are each only 20 and 22% predictive of sales success, respectively. Predictive Index has a technical manual, but it's request only through a PI consultant, which creates friction around independent evaluation. They claim over 350 validity studies, but the published peer-reviewed research focuses more on construct validity, comparing PI scores to established instruments like a 16PF, than on demonstrating that PI scores specifically predict quota attainment. Use it for development and team dynamics if you're already in the ecosystem. For sales rep selection decisions, though, remember, it's a half to a full $1 million all-in call, and the evidence base isn't strong enough to stand on its own in this case. SalesGenomix takes an actuarial approach built on the Chally methodology and a claimed database of 500,000 plus workers, which is conceptually the right model. Actuarial prediction based on empirical patterns outperforms personality theory for selection decisions. The problem is I couldn't find a publicly accessible validation study. They claim 80% accuracy, and that's a meaningful claim. It just isn't independently verified anywhere I could locate. So plausible, but unverified. Now for the tools where the documentation is clear that they cannot be used for selection decisions. We'll start with DISC. No independent technical manual I could identify. No criterion-related validity studies specifically for sales performance. The behavioral style framework goes back to William Moulton Marston in 1928, and it's been commercialized by dozens of vendors who each publish their own partial documentation. It's useful for understanding communication styles and building team self-awareness. It's not a hiring tool. There's no evidence. It predicts sales performance, and the DISC site specifically calls out that it's not for pre-employment screening, MBTI or Myers-Briggs. The documentation here is extensive and explicit, and it explicitly says what most users don't know. The Myers-Briggs company's own technical manual states that the instrument is not designed to predict job performance. Type instability on retests is 39 to 76% depending on the sample, meaning a meaningful percentage of people scored differently if you give them the assessment again a few weeks later. Broad enough organizational adoption of MBTI means using it for selection decisions creates legal exposure with essentially no predictive benefit to offset the risk. Enneagram? I found no formal psychometric manual that seems to exist, nor does meta-analysis of criterion validity for job performance. The Riso-Hudson instrument has some reliability research, but the evidence base for using Enneagram typing as a selection tool is essentially non-existent. When there's no technical documentation, there's no basis for making a hiring decision. StrengthsFinder and CliftonStrengths, Gallup's own technical report, which is publicly available, states clearly that the instrument is not designed or validated for use in employee selection. It's a development tool. The research base is around strengths-based development conversations, not predicting whether someone will close deals. Using it for selection decisions contradicts the publisher's stated purpose. Via Character Strengths is similar, a positive psychology instrument with decent documentation and some peer-reviewed research on general job performance, but it's explicitly a development tool. There's no sales-specific validation. And SAMA, the Strategic Account Management Association, isn't a psychometric assessment at all. It's a professional development and certification organization. I've seen it appear in comparisons to sales hiring tools and sales team evaluations, which reflect some confusion about what it is. SAMA measures participation in the SAM program, not individual hiring fitness. It should be, I would suggest, removed from any list of hiring assessment alternatives. So what does this mean practically? If you're a PE sponsor evaluating commercial talent at a portco or an operator eager to crack the code on making effective sales hires, here's what the evidence supports. The Big Five is your scientific baseline for understanding how a candidate is likely to show up. OMG is the most documented, purpose-built instrument for complex B2B sales selections. SPQ Gold is worth adding if pipeline creation is a specific failure mode and for some reason the OMG findings around hunting are inadequate for your purposes. Caliper is a reasonable option if you want a validated personality-based alternative, recognizing that it's inherently limited in its predictive accuracy vis-a-vis quota attainment. Everything else, DISC, Myers-Briggs, Enneagram, StrengthsFinder, they may have legitimate uses in development and communication training. They should not be the basis of a hiring decision. The evidence simply isn't there. The exercise I'd encourage every sponsor to do is simple. First, understand what tools may be in use across your portfolio. If performance is poor, if turnover is high, quota attainment is low, or other sales strains are common, ask why your companies are not using assessment tools. Then look at the process into which the tool would be incorporated to assess the value, the cost, and EEOC compliance. Finally, call whoever sells you your current assessment, if there's one under use, and ask for the criterion-related validity studies, specifically the ones that show the correlation between assessment scores and sales quota attainment or new logo wins, not general job performance, not customer satisfaction scores, but sales performance specifically. If they can't produce them, or if the documentation they send you is marketing material with internal claims and no independent peer review, you now know what that means. The commercial talent decisions you're making on the basis of unvalidated tools or no tools are costing you significant alpha. Most of what differentiates a portco that executes its growth thesis from one that misses is the quality of the sales team and the rigor of the systems around them. If you're selecting that team with tools that have no evidence of predictive validity, you're adding avoidable variance to the most important human capital decision in the portfolio. That's not a minor inefficiency. That's a systemic gap in commercial diligence, and it's exactly the kind of thing that shows up in extended hold periods and compressed multiples. If you want to explore the full research on assessment tools and how they fit into a rigorous commercial talent evaluation framework, you can find more at edmarshconsulting.com. And if you're working through a sales talent challenge at a portco right now, reach out directly.